So I was thinking more about this linguistic distinction for subjectivity and objectivity, and that's probably the something I should emphasize more when I'm trying to explain this distinction, because you know we have to remember that words have multiple definitions. That when you look them up in the dictionary, there's like 5 or 6 listed. Okay, that is important, and that's just the first. That's just the tip of the iceberg. Because each of those 5 has different ways of interpreting it. Context adds nuances that blurs all of those together and allows the author using a word to even create a novel definition that only makes sense in a particular context. So words and definitions of words become these complex functions with gradients of meanings and emphasis of meanings that are subject to the same sort of patterns attached to other words. And then when they combine these patterns, to me it's very much like each word is a spectrum. And when you bring them together, you're bringing together these spectrums, and they add in all the weird ways that light adds, with reflection and refraction, and odd things like, why should green light and red light make what, yellow light? That's okay. So let's take a factual type statement, an objective factual type statement, like excuse me, like the car is blue. Okay, taken as a subjective statement, the subject there is the car. Now, of course, the car is not necessarily intentional, but as a subject, we are considering its rest frame. Which if it was sentient, I think we draw from a metaphor of ourselves. Maybe it's some anthropomorphization of the car, but only syntactically, only in the grammar. It's not that we're saying the car is alive. It's more like, well, if we were in the car, or from the rest frame of the car. So if an intentional observer was in the rest frame of the car, they would see blue. And see, that interpretation works, whereas when we're being very literal-minded in our understanding of the language, we're being careful and we're being logicians, whereas the objective approach doesn't work, because the car is blue. That says that there is a quality of the car which is blue, and yet the color of the car is that the car depends on the observer's rest frame as well, because if the observer is traveling away from the car at near the speed of light, then that light will be red. The car will look red. So sort of, if you were trying to make this more objective, how would you would find a frame of reference to use as your default frame of reference? And that's what we do in relativity. We tend to say, well, it's a subject's rest frame that we're talking about. So then the car is blue, makes sense. It's told from the subjective point of view of the car. And if I say about that, no, the car is red, that would be told from my subjective reference frame in this vehicle going away from the car at a high speed. Okay, I think it's interesting to look how assigning adjectives works versus making comparisons between 2 objects. Because, for example, the car is blue. Okay, you can't really reverse that. You don't say you don't make that. You can't make a passive verb. Well, okay, for example, let me show you what you can do. If you say the man bites the dog, then from the man's point of view, okay, he is the intentional agent to bit the dog. Okay, if you can always turn that around and say the dog was bitten by the man, and make it a passive, make the dog the subject, but then use a passive verb. Okay, and again, this makes sense with a subjective statement, because those aren't quite the same with a subjective interpretation, because those aren't quite the same sentence. When you're emphasizing that the man bit the dog, it's the intentionality of the man to do an action. When you say that the dog was bitten, then suddenly the dog is just sitting there. His action is, just this living, and something happened to him. So it's two different stories. It's two different ways of telling the same story. What's objective is sort of that we think an event happened. Then what's relative is any of the statements of facts are always going to be relative. And we get an understanding of how one guy says something was happening and another one says, no, something was happening to me, you know. And one subject was doing something, the other one was having something done to them. Doing something and having done something done to you are opposites, but they both coexist in this one situation. And again, you know, this is how each sentence really is a subjective facet. And you wrap as many of these facts around something, you start to triangulate. But in objective reasoning, you try to get rid of contradictions. In relativity, you try to exploit the contradictions. Of course, you get rid of the fake contradictions, but then the ones that are left, you assume are because people had different angles. You know, they were looking from different angles, so they saw different aspects. And then ultimately, you also break those contradictions down so they don't really contradict. Now, you can't do that with the car is blue. When you say the car is blue, you can't say, I mean, you can, but it's very awkward. It doesn't, you know, we don't say that, you know, blue is, you know, okay, so the car is blue. You know, blue is what the car is. Blue happened to the car. You know, you don't, there's not a way to put the point of view from the point of view of the quality. Okay. You can't say, well, from blue's point of view, what is the car? Colorless, or, you know. So it's kind of interesting. And again, I don't think objectively the language makes as much sense. If you know, why would we lose this pattern of looking from that? It's sort of like that question doesn't even exist in the objective interpretation of language. But in a relativistic and skeptical interpretation of language, we see there's lots of these weird little things, you know, that are like dividing by zero, you know. Like another one, define the word the. Try to give a definition for the word the. What does the mean? You know, it's like you can describe what it does, and you know, but you know, we spend a lot of time talking about, well, what does the word I mean? What am I really? You know, what do I mean? What is the unchanging something? Which is a bullshit question. What is the unchanging? That's the referent of the, you know, and like there has to be a substance, and we just, you know, we discuss it ad nauseum in that case. And meanwhile, there's words like, you know, like the, and there's points of view that can't be had in language, and so anyway, I think, yeah, a subjective understanding of facts and these statements, and always realizing every fact has a point of view that it's from, and that the objective facts are trying to make statements not from a point of view, and you don't want to do that. They're like, it's like this. Okay, how do you get a perfect idea of something in a relativistic world? Well, you start with just one point of view in your first impression. So what do you do to do better than that? Oh, you get another one, and you try another one, and you talk to somebody that has their own set. And you keep adding more and more. And it's obvious that, well, what if I want a perfect idea? Get an infinite number of points of view. But the objectivists are like, well, that's kind of a lot of hard work. I know we'll have no point of view. We'll get rid of the bias with no point of view. Which, see, from a relativist point of view, even if I take that seriously, it means you're going to know nothing. You'll be in the dark. If you have no point of view, you won't have any information. And that's basically true. According to objectivist principles, knowledge is impossible to have. It has to be perfectly right, or else it's not knowledge. And we know you can't have knowledge that good, so you don't have any. You know, so we just embrace multiple points of view, and the fact that they are contradictory and stuff, that's what makes all the information processing really possible. So we just go on with it. Okay, cheers.